The auction block rain fell hard from the black sky, turning the dirt streets of the slave market into thick mud. Loud voices echoed through the cold night as alien traders shouted prices and names. Flashing lights danced over metal cages where the weak and wounded waited to be sold. In one of those cages, a young alien girl sat quietly, arms wrapped around her knees. Her name was Kyra, and she had not spoken in days. Kyra's skin was pale silver, almost glowing under the flickering lamps. Her long white hair was dirty and tangled, and her glowing blue eyes stared into nothing. She was thin, bruised, and wearing torn clothes given by her last owner. She had stopped counting how many times she had been sold. To her, every buyer was the same: cruel, cold, and hungry for pain. Lot 47. The auctioneer barked, pulling Kyra out of the cage roughly. The crowd of aliens laughed as she stumbled forward. Trying to keep her balance, she may be small, but she's obedient. Perfect for dark work or entertainment. The auctioneer yelled. Kyra felt her heart sink deeper, her hands shaking from fear and cold. Suddenly, the crowd grew quiet as a strange figure stepped forward. He was not tall, not dressed in royal robes, not armed. He was just a human, middle-aged, with tired eyes and rough hands. He wore a simple coat and boots, and he looked completely out of place. The other aliens began to laugh, pointing at him. A human? What does he want here? One shouted, too old to fight, too soft to own a slave. Another said, but the man ignored them, walking slowly toward the auction block. Kyra looked up, confused. He wasn't smiling like the others. He wasn't staring at her body or laughing at her pain. The auctioneer sneered. You want this one? She's damaged, barely worth anything. The man didn't answer. He reached into his coat and pulled out a few clean credit chips. Sold. The auctioneer grinned, pushing Kyra toward him. She tensed, expecting chains, a collar, maybe a slap, but instead, the man removed his coat and wrapped it around her. Gently, Kyra froze, unsure what to do. No one had ever done that before, not once in her entire life. Come on, the man said softly, leading her away from the lights. His voice was deep, calm, and kind, not something she was used to. She followed him, her bare feet sinking into the cold mud. They reached a small ship parked at the edge of the market. It was old but clean, with no signs of cages or weapons. He helped her climb the ramp and guided her inside. Warm air hit her face as the door closed behind them. Kyra expected him to change, to become violent once they were alone. But instead, he handed her a blanket and pointed to a seat. There's food if you're hungry, he said, walking to the front of the ship. Kyra didn't move, too stunned to speak. The ship lifted off slowly, leaving the ugly market far behind. She stared at the strange man, trying to understand him. Why didn't he chain her? Why didn't he lock her up? Was he just playing with her mind before hurting her later? That's what the last one did, kind at first, then cruel. After some time, the man looked back at her. My name is Elias, he said. You don't have to talk, just rest. Then he turned back to the controls, saying nothing more. Kyra pulled the blanket tighter and sat quietly. Her body was still sore, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel watched like a thing. She stayed awake most of the night, afraid to sleep, but Elias didn't come close, didn't touch her, didn't even look back. He just flew the ship, humming softly to himself. Kyra looked around the small cabin. No cages, no chains, no control panel for slaves. Something was very wrong, or very different, and Kyra didn't know which was worse, as the ship floated quietly through space. Kyra closed her eyes, but only for a moment. She whispered to herself, maybe this one won't hurt me. But even then, she didn't believe it. Not yet. She had been bought before, and kindness always came with a price. When Kyra opened her eyes, she was no longer in a cage. Warm light filtered in through a small window beside the bed. The soft hum of the ship filled the room. Calm and steady, she sat up quickly, heart pounding, expecting shackles on her arms. But there were none. Her silver fingers touched the blanket wrapped around her. It was soft, not torn, not stained with blood. Her mind raced with questions. Where was she? Why hadn't she been locked up? She looked around the room, expecting pain to arrive at any moment. The room was small, but clean, with a soft bed, a metal shelf, and a table with food. Real food, warm bread, some fruit, even water in a clean cup. Kyra stared at it, not trusting her own senses. It had to be a trick, she thought. Maybe he wanted her to eat before hurting her. That's what the others did, pretend to be kind. Before the punishment, then she heard footsteps, slow and quiet. Her body tensed. Muscles ready to run or fight. The door opened and Elias walked in. Holding a folded blanket, he paused when he saw her awake. Then nodded slightly. "You're safe here," he said gently. "You can eat if you want." He placed the blanket on a chair and walked out without another word. Kyra stared after him, stunned. No orders, no threats, no collar. What kind of human was this? Slowly, she reached for the bread and took a small bite. Warm, soft, hot. Not drug knot, like the stale powder the traders used. Her hands trembled as she finished it, then sipped the water. She didn't realize how hungry she had been, or how long it had been since anyone fed her without yelling. After a while, curiosity pulled her to the door. She opened it slowly and peeked into the hallway. The ship was quiet, filled with soft lights and the faint smell of coffee. She followed the scent, careful not to make a sound. Peeking around a corner, she saw Elias sitting at a table, reading. A small paper screen. He wasn't watching her, wasn't waiting to strike. He was sipping something warm, his eyes focused on the news. He looked tired, not dangerous. Still, Kyra stayed hidden. She had trusted faces before. Each time it ended in pain. Elias stood up and walked past her hiding spot, heading to a workshop room through a small gap. Kyra watched him work. He was fixing old machine stools, wires, small robots, his hands steady and sure. There was no sign of weapons, no cages, no control chips for slaves. It didn't make sense. Later that night, Elias placed a soft shirt and pants outside her room. He knocked once, said nothing, and left. Kyra picked up the clothes, smelling them, checking for tricks. They were clean, plain, and stitched by hand. She sat on the bed, heart still unsure. Why wasn't he treating her like the others did? Why was he giving her space, food, warmth? No one gave kindness for free, not to her. Kyra stayed up, watching the door, waiting for it to slam open. But nothing happened. The ship hummed quietly. Through space, the lights dimmed as night mode activated. Still, no chains, no shouting, no pain. Days passed, and the pattern didn't change. Elias would bring food, fix machines, and leave her alone. He only spoke when needed, and always with a soft voice. He didn't ask her to work, didn't ask for anything. He treated her like she mattered. And Kyra didn't know how to feel about it. One morning, she gathered her courage and stepped into the main cabin. Elias looked up, surprised but calm. "You hungry?" he asked, pointing to the pot on the stove. Kyra nodded slowly, and he poured soup into a bowl, sliding it to her. She ate in silence while he returned to his tools. Later, she asked him, barely above a whisper, "Why did you buy me, Elias?" Paused, then looked at her. "I didn't buy a slave," he said. "I rescued someone who didn't deserve that life." Kyra's hands tightened around the bowl, eyes wide. She didn't understand this man. But his words lit a tiny flame inside her chest, feeling she hadn't known in years. Hope, that night. As she lay in the soft bed again, she whispered to herself, maybe, just maybe, he's telling the truth. For the first time, her eyes closed, not in fear, but in quiet wonder. Could this be real? Could she finally be somewhere safe? Kyra stood at the edge of the hallway, her bare feet quiet against the ship's smooth floor. She watched Elias from the shadows. His back turned as he worked on a damaged drone. His movements were slow but skilled, hands steady despite their age. He didn't know she was watching, or maybe he just didn't mind. The workshop was messy but alive, tools scattered, wires curled like snakes. It reminded her of the repair pits on the mining moons, except here no shouting, no whips, only the low hum of machines and Elias's calm breathing. Her eyes slowly moved to his arms, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. That's when she saw them scars. Long and faded, some deep, some burned, not the scars of a cruel man, but of someone who had survived pain himself. Her throat tightened, memories rushing back. Her own arms held scars to marks of owners who called her nothing but property. Kyra stepped back, heart beating faster. She didn't understand this man, didn't trust him fully. But something about those scars made her feel less alone. Later that day, she found a blanket folded neatly outside her door again. A small note was placed on top in shaky handwriting. If cold, take this. No name, no command, just simple care. She clutched it to her chest, unsure why her eyes were suddenly wet. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind was full of noise questions, fears, the sound of chains still echoing in memory. So she left her room and walked quietly toward the engine room. She needed something, anything to calm the shaking inside her. She expected Elias to be asleep, but he was sitting alone at the main table, a warm drink in his hand. A dim light above him cast shadows on his face, making him look older, sadder. He didn't turn his head as she entered, but his voice came soft and low. Couldn't sleep. Kyra nodded, unsure what to say. She sat across from him, wrapping the blanket tighter around her shoulders. They sat in silence for several minutes, the hum of the ship filling the space between them. Finally, she asked the question that had haunted her since day one. Why me? Elias looked at her now, his eyes full of stories he hadn't yet told. He placed his mug down gently, then leaned back in his chair. My daughter, he began, voice rough, was taken by slavers 10 years ago. Kyra froze, eyes wide. She was about your age, he continued. Smart, stubborn, always fixing things. His lips curled in a sad smile, then vanished. I searched every station, every black market, every report. I never found her. The room grew colder, heavier. I don't know if she's alive or gone, Elias said, staring into the dim light. But when I saw you on that auction block, something broke inside me. No one saved her. Maybe I couldn't save her, but I could save you. Kyra looked down at her hands, the blanket now wet with silent tears. No one had ever spoken to her like this, not even before the chains. Pain recognized pain, and in that moment, something inside her softened. She reached out across the table, slow and unsure. Her fingers brushed his scarred hand, just once, not as a servant or a slave, but as a broken soul reaching for another. Thank you, she whispered, her voice shaking. Elias didn't speak, didn't pull away. He only nodded once, and the silence between them felt peaceful. The next morning, Kyra found a toolbox left outside her door. Inside were a few old tools, some bolts, and a small folded paper that said, "Thought you might like to fix things again." She stared at it, stunned. He remembered what she said. Snart. Stubborn, fixing things. It was more than kindness, it was respect. That day, Kyra joined him in the workshop. She didn't speak much, but she watched, learned, and touched the machines with care. Elias guided her only when needed, letting her hands find confidence again. And when their fingers met over a broken circuit, neither of them flinched. She still didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time since childhood, she began to believe in something. Not freedom, not safety, but healing. The days passed slowly, like gentle ripples in a quiet lake. Kyra began waking up without fear, without the old scream caught in her throat. The soft bed no longer felt like a trap, the walls no longer like a cage. She still didn't smile much, but the shadows in her eyes had faded just a little. She spent most of her time in the workshop, beside Elias. Sometimes they talked about tools, circuits, and broken things. Sometimes they said nothing, and that silence felt safe to Kyra. Had never known this kind of life before. She repaired her first broken drone all by herself. Elias watched as it came to life with a soft beep and a spin. Kyra blinked in shock when it hovered up and followed her around like a pet. "Looks like it imprinted on you," Elias said, sipping tea with a rare smile. Kyra looked at the little machine, then at him, and nodded. Each day she grew braver. Walking freely around the ship, she cooked once burnt the meal badly on. Elias still ate it with a straight face. He coughed a little, but never made fun of her. "You'll get better," he said, and she did. But part of her still waited for it all to disappear. Good things never lasted before, not for her. So when the alarm rang one morning, her body froze with old fear. A red light blinked above the main console. "Incoming patrol," the screen flashed. Elias walked to the front, tapping buttons with calm hands. Kyra rushed in, eyes wide, voice shaking. "Are they slavers?" "No," Elias replied. "Just a routine border patrol." But that didn't comfort her. She had seen routine turn into horror before. Kyra backed into the shadows, hiding in the small crawl space behind the engine room. It was tight and dusty, but it made her feel invisible. Her breath came fast, her hands shook. Would they scan the ship? Would they take her back? Would they say she still belonged to someone else? Outside, she could hear voices crackling on the comms. Alien language, formal, clipped. Elias answered calmly, his tone flat, respectful. "She's not here," he said firmly. "I fly alone." There was a pause, then a long silence. Kyra held her breath, hugging her knees. Then the engines hummed louder. The patrol ship was leaving. Elias never came to the crawlspace. He didn't drag her out, didn't yell. He just let her hide until her fear calmed down, and when she finally crawled out, he was making tea like nothing had happened. "They didn't scan," he said, offering her a cup. "You're safe." Kyra stared at him, her heart still racing. He could have exposed her, handed her over, claimed the reward, but he didn't. He risked everything to protect her again. That evening, she sat across from him, staring into her tea. "What if they come back?" she asked. "Then we handle it," Elias said, without fear. Kyra looked down, thinking hard. She had never had choices before. Now she was free to walk, to eat, to speak, but she realized that freedom wasn't just outside the body, had to happen inside too. Later that night, she opened the small cabinet in her room and found a sharp knife inside. She stared at it, remembering how she once planned to use a blade, not to escape, but to end the pain. But tonight, she took the knife, walked into the hallway, and handed it to Elias. "I don't need this anymore," she said softly. He didn't ask why. He only nodded and took it from her hand. And in that moment, something deep inside her finally let go. The next day, she surprised Elias by entering the cockpit during a planned approach. "I want to learn how to fly," she said. He raised an eyebrow, but then stood up and motioned to the seat. "Then let's start." As the stars moved around the front window and the controls lit up under her fingers, Kyra felt something she hadn't known since she was a child. Purpose. She was no longer just surviving. She was learning. growing, choosing. That night, she whispered to herself, "This ship isn't a cage. It's my first real home," and outside the window, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter for her. A cold wind swept through the dark forest as Elias stepped out of the ship. The world below was quiet, no cities, no people, just trees and the whisper of night. Kyra watched him from the ship's window, confusion and worry in her heart. He had landed without saying much, only telling her, "I need to visit someone." She waited for hours, the sky outside turning from deep blue to gray when he didn't return. Something inside her told her to go find him. Kyra wrapped herself in a jacket, grabbed a flashlight, and followed his footprints into the woods. Her steps were soft, careful, her breath visible in the cool air. The deeper she walked, the more silent the world became. No birds, no bugs, no noise, just the sound of wind through dead leaves. Then she saw it, a small stone, covered in moss, half buried in the earth. Elias was kneeling in front of it, head bowed, his hands resting on the cold surface. Kyra froze, not wanting to disturb him, but something about the moment felt fragile, like glass. So she stood quietly, letting the silence speak. After some time, Elias looked up at the sky. His voice was soft, nearly a whisper. She would have been 20 this year. Kyra's heart sank, the truth unfolding in her mind. She was taken by slavers. Elias continued, not turning around. "I searched every corner of the galaxy, paid every informant, fought through pirate space. But I never found her." His hand touched the stone, and Kyra could now see the name. Carved in the local language, Mara, a short name, but heavy. "With sorrow, my daughter," Elias said, finally standing up. "I come here once a year, just in case she's listening." Kyra stepped forward, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry." He looked at her then, eyes red, but not angry. "She deserved better," he said. "So do you." They walked back together in silence, the woods behind them full of ghosts. Back on the ship, Elias placed a small photo frame on the table. It showed a smiling girl with dark hair, holding a toy drone, the same model Kyra had repaired. Kyra stared at the photo, her voice trembling. "She looked kind." "She was," Elias replied. "She liked fixing broken things." His eyes met Kyra's, and for a moment, something powerful passed between them. Kyra sat down slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the frame. "I used to have a brother," she whispered, surprising even herself. "We were taken together, but I never saw him again." Elias didn't speak, only nodded to people. Broken by loss, now sitting at the same table. That night, Kyra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Mara, about the life she might have had, and about how close Kyra herself had come to vanishing into the same darkness. She walked into the workshop, lit only by the soft glow of the screens. She sat down and started building something small, simple, a memory light, the kind used in ancient alien rituals to honor the dead. She worked for hours, not for payment, not for duty, but because she wanted to give something back. When morning came, she placed the glowing light on the table beside Mara's photo. Elias walked in, saw it, and paused. He didn't say anything right away, but when he looked at her, there was something new in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, and nothing more was needed. Later that day, they sat outside the ship. Under a quiet sky, Elias pointed at the stars and told Kyra about constellations, how sailors once used them to find their way. Kyra looked up, wondering if her brother was out there somewhere, wondering if someone had ever saved him the way Elias had saved her. She didn't ask for promises, but she did say one thing, with a voice full of quiet strength. "I want to save others too, like you did for me." Elias looked at her with pride, not as an owner, not even just a rescuer, but like a teacher watching his student become something more. "You will," he said. You already have. And as the sun began to set on that quiet world, Kyra closed her eyes and felt for the first time in her life peace. The sun was just rising over the rocky hills of the quiet planet where the ship had landed. Inside, Kyra sat at the control console, her fingers moving confidently across the buttons. She was learning to fly, to scan, to track systems like a real crew member. Elias stood nearby, watching her with quiet pride. "Nice work," he said, sipping his tea. "You're picking it up faster than I did." Kyra smiled slightly, then returned her focus to the screen. That's when a red signal blinked into view. Unidentified vessel approaching. The ship's AI announced. Kyra's heart tightened. "Elias," she whispered, "it's coming." Fast, they watched in silence as the small cruiser dropped from the clouds. Its design was smooth and sharp, like a weapon built for speed. No trade markings, no planetary symbols. Just black metal and a blood-red emblem. Kyra recognized it instantly. She stood up, her legs shaking. "I know that ship," she said. Voice cracking, "It belongs to Master Vaughn." Elias's eyes narrowed. "The one who's owned you last," she nodded slowly, every muscle in her body locked in fear. Before Elias could respond, the ship landed just 100 meters from them. Dust and wind kicked up, hiding its doors for a moment. Then they opened, and out stepped a tall alien with armored shoulders and cold yellow eyes, his face curled into a cruel smile as he spotted Kyra through the cockpit glass. "Well, well," Master Vaughn called out, his voice full of fake charm. "You ran far, little one." Elias stepped outside the ship alone, calm but firm. "You have no claim here," he said, loud and clear. "She's not yours." Vaughn chuckled. Lifting a metal tablet from his belt, "This says otherwise," he sneered, waving a contract in the air, signed, sealed, and recorded in 3 systems. "She's mine by law." Inside the ship, Kyra stood frozen, her breath shallow. Chains, cages, screaming, all of it flooded her mind again. She looked at the door, tempted to run, hide, disappear, but something else stirred inside her. Anger. Elias didn't move, didn't back down. "I don't recognize slaver law," he said. "This planet doesn't either." Vaughn's expression darkened. "You're just an old man playing hero. Hand her over, or I'll take her by force." At that moment, Kyra stepped out of the ship, her voice trembling but loud. "No." The slaver turned to her, surprised. "What was that?" "I said no," Kyra repeated, louder this time. "You don't own me. Not anymore." Vaughn laughed, cruel and sharp. "You think you have a choice," he sneered. "You're just a—" He never finished the sentence. Because Kyra raised the small stun weapon Elias had once shown her. Her hands were shaking, but her aim was steady. "I'm not a thing," she said. And she pulled the trigger. The blast hit Vaughn in the chest, sending him stumbling back with a groan. Elias rushed forward, grabbing the slaver's weapon and tossing it aside. Together, they restrained him, using his own cuff-scold irony in every click. The local authorities arrived an hour later, summoned by Elias's emergency signal. Vaughn was arrested, and the forged contract was destroyed. Turns out, he had broken dozens of interstellar laws, and now he was going where he had sent so many others a cage. Kira watched from a distance as the cruiser took him away. She didn't cheer, didn't cry. She just stood tall, her chin raised, her eyes dry. For once, she didn't feel like prey, she felt powerful. Later that night, she sat quietly beside Elias by the fire. The stars above sparkled like tiny flames in the dark. "You stood up to him," Elias said, handing her a cup of tea. Kyra nodded slowly. "I was scared," she whispered. "But I didn't want to run anymore." He looked at her for a long time, then said, "That's what courage is." Kyra took a deep breath. Her heart still hurt, her past still haunted. But now, she knew something had changed. She had faced her greatest fear, and she had chosen herself. The stars were quiet the night Kyra finally stepped out alone. She stood on the ship's ramp, wind brushing through her silver-white hair. The ground below was soft grass, the kind that tickled bare feet. Above her, the sky stretched wide and free, no walls, no gates, no chains. It had been 2 weeks since they'd handed Vaughn over to the authorities. 2 weeks since the last ghost of her past had been taken away in cuffs. Elias had barely spoken of it since. He didn't need to. Kyra had changed, and they both knew it. She didn't flinch when someone knocked. She didn't wake up screaming. At night, she no longer waited for kindness to turn cruel. She was no longer a prisoner. She was something new, inside the ship. Elias worked on his favorite old drone. Kyra entered with a gentle knock. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. He looked up, surprised to see her dressed in the flight suit he had given her last week. It fit her now, not just in size, but in purpose. "I've made a decision," she said softly. Elias set the drone aside and gave her his full attention. "I want to help rescue others," Kyra continued, her voice steady. "Girls like me, who are still trapped, still waiting." Elias didn't speak for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I knew you'd say that," he said. Kyra tilted her head. "Surprised? I saw it in your eyes," Elias explained. "The day you fixed that drone. I knew you weren't just trying to survive. You were trying to rebuild." They sat together, planning quietly. A few systems were still crawling with illegal traders, forgotten by patrols. Kyra wanted to start there not with weapons, but with hope. She would be the one to knock, to reach into dark cages and offer light. That night, she sat alone in her room. She looked in the mirror for a long time. The girl staring back was no longer the frightened slave from the auction block. Her eyes were sharp now, strong, no longer waiting to be broken. She opened the drawer and pulled out the small ID chip from her collar, the last one Vaughn had put on her. She placed it on the table, then crushed it under her heel. Metal cracked, lights flickered, and just like that, Tit was gone the next morning. Elias found her working on something in the cockpit. She had accessed the ship's records and edited the passenger file. "Kyra," he said gently. "What are you doing?" She turned to him and smiled. A rare, real smile. "I'm choosing my name." He stepped closer, curious. The screen now read, "Kyra Elias." She looked up at him, voice full of quiet pride. "You gave me freedom," she said, "but now I choose to belong to something good. To someone who never treated me like property." Elias didn't speak, his eyes glistening, not with sadness, but with something warmer, acceptance. He placed a hand on her shoulder and simply said, "Welcome to the crew, Kyra Elias." From that day forward, the ship was no longer just a vessel. It became a beacon, moving home for the lost and broken. They traveled to forgotten moons, hidden camps, and dark ports. Kyra learned fast how to fly, how to negotiate, how to speak for those who had no voice. She rescued 3 girls in the first month. Each one arrived trembling, silent, the same way she once did. But Kyra didn't tell them to be strong. She sat beside them, shared her story, and let them know they weren't alone. One evening, a girl asked her, "Are you like a captain?" Kyra smiled and replied, "No, I'm just someone who remembers what it felt like to be forgotten." Elias often watched her from the side, never claiming credit. He had saved one girl, but that girl would now save dozens, maybe hundreds. And when people asked her name at docking stations or supply points, she never hesitated. "I'm Kyra Elias," she would say, "and I'm no one's slave." The stars, once so far away, now felt like home. She had earned her name, her future, and her freedom one choice at a time. And though her past would always be a shadow, her present burned brighter than any chain that ever held her.